black billionaire walked into a Chicago hotel for a scheduled meeting. The white CEO took one look at him and called security. What she didn't know would cost her everything. Like and subscribe if you believe respect shouldn't depend on what you're wearing. The Grand Meridian Hotel in Chicago had a way of making people feel like they mattered. The crystal chandeliers threw soft gold light across the white marble floors, and the air smelled of fresh lilies and something faintly woody, the kind of scent that costs money to manufacture and more money to maintain. On a Tuesday morning in November, with Lake Michigan wind pressing cold against the glass facade outside, the lobby felt like a sealed world, quiet and deliberate, designed to remind everyone inside that they had earned the right to be there. Claire Hartwell believed that completely. She had believed it for 12 years. She stood near the east window in her cream Armani suit, laughing at something Edward Grant had just said. Edward was a British investor with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses who had told her no the previous week and whom she was now working, carefully and methodically, to change his mind. She laughed the way she always laughed in rooms like this, head slightly back, hand light on her collarbone, eyes warm but measuring. It was not a dishonest laugh, it was a practiced one. At 9:02, the revolving door moved. Brett Calloway walked in first. He wore a charcoal Hugo Boss suit, a silk tie the color of a winter sky, and the easy stride of a man who had never once walked into a room and wondered whether he belonged. Claire's eyes moved across him, unfamiliar face, well-dressed, not her concern, and returned to Edward. 20 steps behind Brett, Damon Rivers walked in. Navy polo, gray khakis, white sneakers without a mark on them, a leather portfolio tucked under his left arm. He was tall, unhurried, and he moved through the lobby with the particular kind of stillness that belongs to people who have learned, at great cost, not to perform their confidence for anyone. Claire saw him, and something happened in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Something that required no decision, no intention, no conscious thought. Her brain, built across 4 decades of private schools and Lincoln Park dinner tables and boardrooms that all looked more or less the same, ran the calculation in less than a second and returned a verdict. This man does not belong here. Her laugh didn't stop all at once. It cooled first, the warmth draining out of it while the shape of it remained, and then it was gone. She shifted her weight, positioning herself between Damon and Edward like a door that had quietly closed. "Can I help you?" she asked. The tone was not unkind in any obvious way. It was the tone of someone asking why a package had been delivered to the wrong address. Damon stopped. He had heard that tone before. At MIT, when a professor had asked twice if he was in the right classroom. At a restaurant in Boston, when the host had asked if he was there about the kitchen job. Each time, he had recognized it the way you recognize weather, not from one sign, but from the feel of the whole air. He smiled, not the smile of a man asking for permission. "Damon Rivers," he said, and extended his hand. "We have a 9 o'clock meeting about the Series C for Hartwell Dynamics." Claire looked at his outstretched hand and did not move. "I don't have a meeting like that." "Rivers Capital," Damon said, keeping his voice even and warm. "My assistant Lisa confirmed with your office 3 weeks ago. You can call Ashley to verify." "What I see," Claire said, her voice lifting just enough to carry to Edward, just enough to carry to the woman on the nearby sofa who had looked up from her phone, "is someone who walked into a private meeting without an invitation and dressed like he's heading to a weekend barbecue." Edward Grant cleared his throat softly. Claire did not look at him. "Do you know where the service entrance is?" "Out the front, turn left. Miss Hartwell." Damon's voice shifted, not louder, just cleaner, the way a line becomes clear when the fog lifts. "If there's been a miscommunication, you can call Stephen Cole, your CFO. We spoke last month about investment terms. I flew in from Boston this morning." Claire turned toward the security desk without answering him. "Excuse me, I need some assistance. This gentleman isn't on the guest list." Walter Grimes was standing at his post in the corner of the lobby. He was 55 years old, with salt and pepper hair, and the steady posture of a man who had held the same job with the same discipline for 11 years. He had recognized Damon Rivers the moment he walked through the door, not from Forbes, not from any particular devotion to financial news, but because his son Marcus Jr. worked at a startup in Atlanta that existed because Rivers Capital had written a check for $12 million 2 years ago and believed in something before anyone else did. Walter picked up his radio. His hand did not shake. But something inside his chest pulled tight. A feeling he had no clean word for, a feeling that had lived in him for 55 years, in a body that the world had always looked at first and listened to second. He walked toward Damon. Their eyes met. Two black men in the lobby of the Grand Meridian on a Tuesday morning, one in a polo, one in a uniform. The look that passed between them lasted 1 second and contained everything that could not be said in that room, in that moment, in front of those people. "Sir," Walter said, his voice professional and hollow, "if you'll come with me." Damon lowered his hand slowly. He looked at Claire one last time, not with anger, not with appeal, with the particular stillness of a man who is filing something away, carefully, for later. He had expected this, or something close to it. Carol's data had pointed here. The polo test rarely surprised him anymore. What it still did, every time, was confirm. And confirming hurt in a way that expecting never quite prevented. Then he nodded at Walter and walked toward the door. 20 feet away, near the east window, Brett Calloway stood with his coffee and watched all of it. He had the words. He had the suit, the credentials, the face that this lobby had been designed to reassure. He could have spoken. He chose, instead, to observe. And later he would spend a long time deciding whether there was a meaningful difference between those two things. Outside, the November wind came off Lake Michigan like a warning. Damon stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting his pulse settle. His phone buzzed. Lisa. He looked at the screen, then looked up at the gray Chicago sky. "Cancel everything this afternoon," he said when she picked up. "Book me back to Boston." But the investment, the term sheet was ready, Lisa. His voice was quiet and final. "I just got my answer." 3 months before the morning at the Grand Meridian, Claire Hartwell sat in her corner office on the 38th floor of the Hartwell Dynamics building and looked out at Lake Michigan the way she always did when the numbers got bad enough that looking at them felt like touching something hot. The lake was flat and gray that morning, indifferent in the way that large bodies of water are always indifferent. And Claire had been staring at it long enough that her coffee had gone cold on the desk beside her. Hartwell Dynamics had been valued at $900 million 2 years ago. The cover of Wired had called her the woman rebuilding how enterprise software thinks. The Chicago Innovation Awards had given her a trophy she kept on the credenza behind her desk, where she could see it without turning around. Now the company was burning through $10 million every month, and the bank account held enough cash to last 10 weeks. After the 10th week, there was nothing. No soft landing, no last-minute pivot, just bankruptcy. And 3,500 people walking out of a building for the last time. She had pitched 20 investors over 9 months. 20 times she had walked into a room with her deck and her poise and her Stanford MBA and her absolute certainty that if they would just listen, they would understand. 20 times they had said no. One email had been leaked. She still didn't know by whom, and it had used the words arrogant and doesn't listen to feedback and serious concerns about company culture, and Claire had deleted it and told herself that people who couldn't recognize vision always dressed it up as a red flag. But the account balance didn't care about her narrative. There was one name left on the list. Stephen Cole knocked twice and let himself in, carrying the slim leather folder he always carried, the one that meant the numbers inside were bad enough that he had organized them carefully before bringing them to her. He was 45, Korean-American, precise in the way that good CFOs are precise, not cold, but exact. He set the folder on her desk and opened it to a single page with a single name. Rivers Capital, he said. Damon Rivers. This is the last viable option we have. Claire looked at the page. I've never heard of him. Stephen paused for exactly 1 beat. A pause so brief that Claire, who was already looking back at the window, didn't catch it. He doesn't seek attention, Stephen said. What he did not say, what he had decided months ago he would not say until he absolutely had to, was that he had contacted Rivers Capital himself without Claire's knowledge or authorization 9 weeks earlier. He had done it because he had watched Claire pitch and watched the way rooms reacted to her, and he understood with the clarity of someone who had spent 4 years as her CFO that if Claire walked into a meeting with Damon Rivers the way she walked into every meeting, as though she were the one doing the other party a favor, it would be over before it started. So Stephen had spent 9 weeks building a quiet relationship with Lisa, Damon's assistant, sending the right documents at the right times, answering questions thoroughly and without ego, making the case not for Hartwell Dynamics as an investment, but for Hartwell Dynamics as a company worth saving. Damon had agreed to the meeting because he trusted what Stephen Cole had shown him, not because of Claire. Claire was sitting 3 feet away from the person who had done more to save her company than she had in 9 months of pitching, and she was looking out at the lake and thinking about what she was going to say in the meeting, and she had no idea. She picked up her coffee, found it cold, and set it back down. "Set it up," she said. "Whatever he needs." Stephen nodded and closed the folder. "His assistant will confirm logistics," he said, and walked back toward the door. And Claire had already turned back to the window before he reached it. The penthouse on the 45th floor of a building in Boston's financial district did not look like the office of a man worth $4 billion, which was more or less the point. The walls were white. The furniture was clean-lined and functional. 3 sides of glass looked out over Boston Harbor, where the water caught the early morning light and held it. Damon Rivers poured his first cup of coffee at 6:58, took 1 sip, found it slightly too hot, and set it down on the counter to wait. He had been doing this every morning for 20 years, pouring the coffee, taking 1 sip, setting it down, and he had never once learned to pour it at the right temperature the first time. Some routines exist not to be solved, but to be kept. He had grown up in East St. Louis, Illinois, in a part of the city where the streetlights worked half the time and the schools worked less than that. His mother had been a nurse who worked double shifts, and never once, in all the years he was watching her, let exhaustion become an excuse. His father, Frank Rivers, had left when Damon was 7, not with cruelty, with shame. The particular shame of a man who could not find a foothold in a system that had not been built to hold him, and who could not bear to let his son watch him fail. Frank had found Damon again when Damon was 22, sitting across from him at a coffee shop in Cambridge on a Tuesday afternoon. Frank was older than Damon had expected, with calloused hands and eyes that were tired but not defeated. He told Damon about the times he had walked into rooms in his best clothes and been looked through anyway. He told him about the loans he had been denied, the contracts he had been passed over for, the small accumulated weight of being a black man trying to build something in a country that kept moving the floor. And he said something that Damon had carried with him every day since. "You're going to be judged no matter what you wear, son, so wear what makes you feel like yourself, and let people show you who they are before you show them who you are." Frank Rivers died of lung cancer 14 months ago. Damon flew back to East St. Louis for the funeral and wore a black polo, his own private language of mourning. Every meeting since had been a continuation of that conversation. At 6:59, the video call connected. Carol, his senior analyst, appeared on the left screen. "I finished the deep dive on Hartwell Dynamics," she said. "The technology is genuinely strong. Their data processing algorithm is top 5% in the sector. The financials are a disaster. And Claire Hartwell has a reputation problem." Define that. 4 anonymous Glassdoor reviews, all from employees of color. Microaggressions, being passed over for promotions with documented qualifications. Each complaint had been filed with HR. She paused. All 4 were dismissed without investigation. He did not mention the email that had been leaked to investors the previous year. He had his suspicions about its origin. He decided some truths were better left to settle on their own. Damon picked up his coffee again. It had cooled to exactly the right temperature. "Book Chicago," he said, "and tell Brett." Brett Calloway, his white business partner of 5 years, the other name on the Rivers Capital letterhead, already knew what booking Chicago meant. They had done this before, in cities and lobbies that all eventually looked the same. Brett would enter the room first, dressed in his best suit, and Damon would follow 20 steps behind. They would watch how the same person behaved with each of them in the span of 90 seconds. It was not a game. It was a methodology that Damon had developed after the 3rd time a company he almost invested in turned out to have catastrophic leadership failures that no pitch deck had ever shown. The way a person treats someone they believe has nothing to offer them is the most honest information they will ever give you. His coffee was perfect now. He finished it in 3 sips and went to pack. At 10:32 in the morning, Claire was composing an email to the board when Ashley knocked and opened the door in the same motion, which she had never done in 3 years of working for Claire. And that single deviation from protocol told Claire, before she looked up, that something had shifted in a way that would not shift back. Ashley was 28 and usually carried herself with the bright, managed energy of someone who took pride in being unflappable. She did not look unflappable now. She looked like someone who had just read something on a screen and had been standing alone with it long enough to understand what it meant. She set the iPad on Claire's desk and didn't say anything. The Forbes article filled the screen. The headline read, "Damon Rivers, the billionaire investor America doesn't know." Beneath it was a photograph. The same face, the same calm expression. The same man Claire had pointed toward the service entrance 90 minutes ago. Claire looked at the photograph and did not move. Ashley scrolled without being asked. Net worth, $4 billion. Rivers Capital, $4 billion in assets under management. Forbes, 400. Ranked, 150. Track record, 50 investments, 45 successful exits. Board member at Amazon, JP Morgan, Salesforce, and 6 others. Claire's hands, which had been resting on her keyboard, went still in a way that was different from simply not typing. Ashley scrolled further. There was a pull quote from a Wall Street Journal profile, set in large type. "I dress casually to every first meeting. I want to see if people respond to my ideas or to my appearance. In 12 years, I've walked away from several companies because of what I saw in those first few minutes. In every case, the bias I observed in the lobby turned out to be the same bias driving decisions in the boardroom. The clothes are just the instrument. The data is what I'm after." Several companies, Claire thought, and then the rest of the thought arrived without mercy. Every single one of them had failed. The door opened again. Stephen Cole walked in without knocking, which he had also never done. He was holding nothing, no folder, no tablet, and his face had the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting for a specific moment and has now watched it arrive. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I was the one who contacted Rivers Capital, not on your instruction. 9 weeks ago, I reached out to his assistant directly and spent the better part of 2 months building a case for why Damon Rivers should take this meeting." Claire looked at him. "You did this without telling me." "I did it because if I'd told you, you would have handled the outreach yourself. And the way you handle outreach," he stopped. Started again. "He doesn't invest in companies, Claire. He invests in the people leading them. And I wasn't sure you would show him what he needed to see." The room was very quiet. Somewhere below them, the 38th floor hum of an office going about its Tuesday continued, indifferent and steady. "He agreed to the meeting because he trusted what I showed him over 9 weeks of emails and calls," Stephen said. "Not because of anything that happened in this building." Claire had been Claire Hartwell for 41 years, and she had sat across from difficult information many times, and she had always known what to do with it. Reframe it, redirect it, find the angle where it became manageable. She did not know what to do with this. Part of her, the part that had run a company for 12 years, understood that what Stephen had done was technically a breach, the kind that ended careers and invited litigation. The rest of her understood, with a clarity she did not welcome, that it had also been the only reason the meeting happened at all. She picked up her phone. Damon's number went to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She put the phone down and looked at Stephen, who was still standing near the door with his hands at his sides, and for the first time in 4 years of working together, she noticed that he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hours he worked. By 11 o'clock, Claire had called Damon Rivers 9 times. By noon, she had sent 5 emails, 2 LinkedIn messages, and a text to a number she found through a mutual contact that turned out to be his old assistant's phone. By 1 o'clock, the call stopped going to voicemail and started going directly to nothing, which meant he had blocked her number. She switched to her personal cell, called again, and put the phone on the desk and sat with her hands flat on the surface the way someone sits when they are trying to physically hold themselves together. At 2:15, Edward Grant posted on Twitter. He did not name anyone. He wrote, "Witnessed something at a Chicago meeting this morning. I won't soon forget. The way you treat someone at the door is the most honest preview of how you'll treat them at the table." The tweet had 400 retweets before Claire finished reading it. At 2:40, Brett Calloway posted on LinkedIn, and this was the one that traveled further and faster and landed differently because of who was saying it. He wrote, "Today I stood 20 steps behind my business partner and watched what happened when he walked through a lobby door. I told myself I was observing. What I was actually doing was using the one privilege I've never had to think about. The privilege of being able to choose whether to engage. My partner doesn't get that choice. I've been quiet too long about moments like this." That silence was its own kind of complicity. At 3 o'clock, Arthur Shaw called. Arthur was 68, the board chairman, a man Claire had always read as fundamentally on her side, and when she answered, she braced for anger. He did not sound angry. He sounded like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had recently decided to set it down, regardless of where it landed. Claire, he said, I've known about the HR complaints. The 4 that were filed and dismissed, I've known for over a year. I said nothing because the quarterly numbers were moving in the right direction, and I told myself the cultural concerns were manageable. He was quiet for a moment. What happened this morning didn't come from nowhere, and my silence didn't help. I'll be submitting my resignation from the board by end of week, he said. That's not absolution. It's the least the situation requires. Then he hung up before she could respond. That evening, Walter Grimes sat in his kitchen on the south side and called his son. Marcus Jr. answered on the second ring with the loose warmth of someone who was not expecting bad news. Walter told him what had happened that morning. He told him straight, without softening it, the way he had always tried to tell his son the truth about hard things. Marcus Jr. was quiet for long enough that Walter could hear him breathing. Dad, Marcus finally said, you were doing your job. I know that. I knew who he was when I walked over to him. I know. And I still did it. Another silence. Dad, if you ever get a chance to say something true about that moment, in any form, any place, you should take it. Not for him, not for me. Just because the truth deserves to get out. Walter set the phone down on the kitchen table and looked at it for a while after the call ended. Then he typed Hartwell Dynamics press conference into his phone's browser and began to read. Claire took the red-eye from O'Hare and did not sleep. She sat in the window seat with the shade pulled down and thought, not in the organized way she usually thought, but in the raw, circular way that comes when you have removed all the usual structures and there is nothing left but the thing itself. She landed in Boston at 6:40 in the morning, changed in the airport bathroom, could not get the coffee stain off the sleeve of her Armani jacket, and decided it didn't matter. The lobby of Rivers Capital was 40 stories of glass and steel that managed to feel, inside, like a very expensive library. White marble floors, contemporary art on clean walls, a full silence of the kind that belongs to places where serious things happen quietly. Lisa was at the reception desk. She looked up when Claire gave her name, and something moved across her face that was not quite recognition and not quite surprise, but something between the two. Mr. Rivers is in meetings, Lisa said. He could be until 6 or 7 this evening. I'll wait, Claire said. She sat in a chair near the window. The chair was beautiful and uncomfortable in the precise way that certain expensive things are, designed for the impression they made, not the function they served. She sat in it without complaint. At 9:45, a group of employees passed through the lobby, and 2 of them recognized her and did not try to hide it. At 10:30, Lisa brought her a cup of coffee without being asked. Claire looked up and said, "Thank you," with a simplicity and directness that surprised them both, and Lisa nodded and walked away and thought about it for the rest of the morning. At 1:15, Lisa came to tell her that Mr. Rivers would see her for 15 minutes. Conference room C, 4th floor. The room was small and had no windows, and the lighting was the flat, clear kind that left nowhere to hide. Damon was already seated when she walked in. Gray button-down, dark jeans. He looked rested and composed, and he did not stand. "Please sit," he said. Claire sat. Her hands settled in her lap, and she let them rest there without trying to manage them. "Before you say anything," Damon said, "I want to tell you something." He told her about Frank Rivers. He told it simply and without self-pity, the way you tell a story that belongs to someone else and that you have been trusted to carry carefully. He told her about the coffee shop in Cambridge, and the calloused hands, and the tired eyes, and the thing his father had said about wearing what makes you feel like yourself. He told her that Frank had died 14 months ago, and that every meeting since had been a conversation he was still having with a man he had found too late and lost too soon. Claire did not look away while he talked. She did not try to fill the silences. When he finished, she said nothing for a moment, and the nothing she said was not empty. "If I had walked in yesterday in a suit," Damon said, "would you have called security?" The silence in the room had weight. "No," Claire said. Her voice was very quiet. "I wouldn't have. That's what this is about, Miss Hartwell. Not mistaken identity. Bias." He slid a sheet of paper across the table. She read it slowly. Public acknowledgement, Independent cultural audit. 45% board diversity within 12 months. $6 million from her personal funds to the Rivers Black Founder Fund. 6 months of bias coaching. Quarterly progress reports. And then, handwritten in the margin, a condition that was not on any formal document. You will meet, in person and without lawyers or recording devices, 5 former employees of color who left Hartwell Dynamics. You will sit with them. You will listen. When she looked up, she said, I agree to all of it. Then she said, I want to add something. He waited. I want to meet Walter, the security guard who walked you out. Not to apologize, because an apology from me isn't worth much to him right now. But because I need to hear what it's like to be a black man who has to make that choice every time someone gives him an order. I need to hear that from him. Damon looked at her for a long moment. I'll ask him, he said. The press conference room at Hartwell Dynamics held 62 journalists on a Thursday morning and smelled like coffee, and anticipation, and the particular nervous energy of a room full of people who sense they are about to hear something that will be quoted for years. Claire stood at the podium without notes, without a teleprompter, without the careful architecture of talking points that her PR firm had offered and she had declined. She had not slept well in 4 days. She was not wearing extra makeup to cover it. She looked like what she was, a person who had been taken apart and had not yet finished putting herself back together. 2 days ago, she said, and her voice caught on the first word and then steadied, I committed an act of racial profiling. The cameras clicked. I saw a black man walk into a hotel lobby, and within 10 seconds I had decided he didn't belong there. I did not see a businessman. I did not see a person who had flown across the country to help me. I saw the color of his skin and the clothes he was wearing, and I let my brain, trained across a lifetime in rooms that all looked the same, make a judgment before he spoke a single word. I called him a scammer. I pointed at him. I had him removed from the building. She did not look at her hands. She looked at the room. There is no version of this that is a misunderstanding. There is no version where I was having a hard day and made a mistake. This was bias, mine, expressed as an action that caused real harm to a real person. I will not use softer language because the softer language would be for my comfort, and my comfort is not what this moment is about. She read the commitments from the paper without making them sound like a list because she had practiced reading them until they felt like decisions rather than consequences. The independent audit, the board restructuring, the $6 million, the coaching, the quarterly reports. When she finished reading, she set the paper down. I hope this can be a lesson, she said. Not about one bad morning, about the systems we carry inside ourselves and never examine until they cost us something we can't afford to lose. A reporter in the second row raised her hand before the formal Q&A had been announced. Will you resign? I will be transitioning out of the CEO role within 30 days, Claire said, to make room for leadership that the company actually deserves right now. What happened next had not been in any press release or advance briefing. Ashley had made one call the previous evening to a number Claire had given her. Walter Grimes walked out from the side of the room in his Grand Meridian uniform and stood at the microphone, and the room went so quiet that the sound system's ambient hum became audible. He told the truth the way he had told it to his son on the phone, straight and without softening. He said he had known who Damon Rivers was when he walked over to him. He said he had done it anyway because the job required it. And he needed the job, and because the system that had put him in that position was the same system he had been navigating his entire life. He said that being a black man in a service uniform meant making that choice more often than anyone on the other side of the calculation ever had to think about. He said he was sorry to Damon Rivers. He said he was sorry to his son. He stepped back from the microphone. The woman in the second row, the one who had asked Claire if she would resign, began to clap. Slowly, then faster, and then the room joined her. And it was the strangest sound Claire had ever heard in a room she had built. Applause that had nothing to do with her. The Netflix documentary was called The Polo Test, Race and Power in Corporate America, and it opened without music. The first image was security camera footage from the Grand Meridian. Grainy, slightly overexposed, shot from a high corner angle. Claire's back was to the camera. Damon was facing it. You could see his expression clearly. You could see her gesture toward the service entrance. The Grand Meridian had released the footage voluntarily 3 days after the press conference, following a public statement from its management acknowledging the events of that morning. The filmmakers had made the choice not to subtitle the audio, which was mostly inaudible anyway, because they understood that the image did not need explanation. It needed only to be seen. The documentary released 14 months after the events at the Grand Meridian and accumulated 15 million views in its first 30 days. Business schools added it to syllabi without being asked. Harvard wrote a case study. Stanford hosted 4 separate panel discussions. But the segment that traveled furthest, the 8 minutes that got clipped and shared and reshared until it existed independently of the film that contained it, was not about Claire, and it was not about Damon. It was Walter Grimes sitting in his kitchen on the South Side in his flannel shirt with a coffee mug on the table and no studio lighting and no one telling him what to say. He said what he had said to his son, and he said it the same way, at a kitchen table, to no one in particular, because the truth had to go somewhere. He said that being a black man in a service job meant living inside a specific kind of daily calculation that most people never had to perform, a calculation that weighed dignity against necessity and rarely offered a clean answer. He said the choice he had made that morning at the Grand Meridian was not the first time he had made it. He said it probably wouldn't be the last. He looked at the camera and said he was telling the truth now, not because it would change what had already happened, but because his son had told him the truth deserved to get out. The segment was shared 8 million times in 1 week. Brett Calloway appeared in the final 15 minutes of the film, and he did not present himself as a person who had done something right. He described standing 20 steps behind Damon and watching what happened and choosing to call it data collection. And he said that the specific kind of privilege he had never had to examine was the privilege of being able to opt into or out of the consequences of a room, the privilege of observation without exposure. He said he had been quiet about moments like this for a long time because they had not directly cost him anything, and that the silence had been its own kind of participation. Across the industry, 15 major tech companies announced independent cultural audits in the 6 weeks after Hartwell's report became public. The National Venture Capital Association passed a requirement, not a recommendation, a requirement that all portfolio companies submit DEI metrics in their annual reporting. Damon expanded the Rivers Black Founder Fund from its original size to $300 million, and the fund went on to support 50 companies that collectively created 2,500 jobs and maintained an 89% operating rate. His TED Talk, titled "Dignity Shouldn't Require a Net Worth," reached 20 million views and was incorporated into the curriculum of 150 business schools worldwide. The line quoted most often was not the most dramatic line in the talk. It was a simple one, delivered quietly near the end. Respect is not a reward for achievement. It is not something you earn by proving your worth to people who started out doubting it. It is something you are owed from the first moment you exist. And every system, every room, every person that operates otherwise is simply wrong. Stephen Cole stood at the front of the Hartwell Dynamics all-hands meeting in month 3 and presented the audit results the way Damon had asked Claire to present them, without softening, without spin, without the careful hedging that turns accountability into reputation management. 87% of senior leadership positions had been held by white employees. Black employees had been promoted at a rate 42% lower than white colleagues with equivalent qualifications and tenure. 4 HR complaints about racial discrimination had been filed over 3 years. All 4 had been dismissed without investigation. The auditorium was very quiet while he read the numbers. Then he clicked to the next slide and said, "This is what we were. Now here's what we're becoming." The new numbers were different. Diverse candidate interviews were up 70%. The promotion gap had narrowed to 15%. 0 complaints had been dismissed without investigation. 85% of employees reported a significant improvement in workplace culture. In the back of the room, Claire sat in a seat with no particular distinction. Not a front row seat, not a seat near the door. She watched Stephen lead the way she had watched very few people lead in her career, with the particular authority that comes from having earned a room's trust, rather than simply occupying its highest position. She had not expected to feel what she felt watching him up there, which was something adjacent to grief, not for herself, but for the years she had spent in that position without understanding what it actually required. In month 4, she met Denise Carter at a coffee shop in River North. Denise was 36, with gold-framed glasses and the posture of someone who had made a decision before arriving not to make herself smaller for this conversation. She told Claire about the meeting in 2021 where she had been interrupted 3 sentences into a proposal and redirected to a white male colleague who presented a less detailed version of the same idea and received the credit. She told Claire about the feedback she had received afterward, that she needed to adjust her communication style to better fit company culture, and about the 18 months after she left that she had spent trying to locate her professional confidence in a field that had briefly made her doubt whether it had ever existed. Claire listened. She did not explain. She did not contextualize. She did not perform contrition in a way that required Denise to manage Claire's feelings about what she was hearing. When Denise finished, Claire said, "What I did wasn't fair. You deserve to be heard. I didn't give you that." Denise looked at her for a moment, then nodded. Once, slowly, 2 weeks later, Stephen Cole called Denise directly and offered her the VP of Engineering position. "You'd have full autonomy over your team," he said. "No outside interference in your hiring decisions. None." Denise asked for 1 day to think. The next morning, she called back. "I have one condition," she said. "I run my own interviews. I make my own calls. Nobody reviews my decisions." "Agreed," Stephen said, without pausing. Claire's 6 months of bias coaching with Dr. Sandra Hughes took place in a small office on North Michigan Avenue that had none of the altitude or glass or studied elegance of the rooms Claire had spent her career in. Dr. Hughes was 61, 25 years into this work, with no particular patience for people who wanted to feel better about themselves rather than actually change. In their 3rd session, she asked Claire how it was possible to have spent 15 years in a leadership role without once examining her own assumptions about who belonged in which rooms. Claire thought about it honestly before answering. "I thought voting the right way was enough," she said. "I thought writing checks to the right organizations was enough." "That's passive allyship," Dr. Hughes said. "What Damon Rivers experienced was active harm. I know that now. The question isn't whether you know it. The question is whether knowing it changes anything you do tomorrow morning when no one is watching and there are no consequences either way." Claire didn't answer immediately. She was learning, slowly, that some questions were meant to be carried rather than solved. The Grand Meridian Hotel looked exactly the same. The chandeliers were the same. The marble floors held the same light. The air carried the same mixture of lilies and wood and expensive, engineered calm. Outside on Michigan Avenue, Chicago was doing what Chicago does in November, pressing forward against the cold with its chin down and its collar up, indifferent to the weather and to everything else that might prefer it to slow down. The Hartwell Dynamics Annual Investor Summit occupied the main conference hall, and the room was full in a way that last year's had not been, not just numerically, but texturally, in the variety of faces and the ease of the conversation and the particular hum that a room makes when the people in it feel like they belong there rather than like they are working to prove that they do. Walter Grimes was at his post, near the entrance at 8:55, 11 years, in the same building, the same uniform, the same measured attention to who came through the door and what they might need. At 9 o'clock, the revolving door moved. Damon Rivers walked in, navy polo, gray khakis, white sneakers, leather portfolio under his left arm, exactly as he had looked 1 year ago to the day. Walter stepped away from his post, not because protocol required it, because he chose to. He stood straight and met Damon's eyes and said, "Mr. Rivers, welcome back." Damon stopped. He looked at Walter the way he had looked at him in this same lobby 1 year ago, not past him, not through him, at him. He extended his hand and Walter took it. "Marcus Jr.," Damon said. "His company hit a 15 million Series A last month. He called me to say thank you. I told him to thank his father." Walter's jaw tightened slightly and then released. He looked at a point just past Damon's shoulder and then looked back. "He was always a good kid," Walter said. "He learned it from somewhere," Damon said. Claire was waiting at the main entrance to the conference hall. She had arrived 20 minutes early, and she had not spent those 20 minutes talking to investors or working the room. She had stood where she was standing now and waited, which was a thing that Claire Hartwell of 1 year ago would not have recognized as a meaningful choice, but which the Claire Hartwell of today understood was the entire point. When Damon approached, she extended her hand first. He shook it, firmly, professionally, and without the performance of forgiveness or the performance of its absence. It was the handshake of two people who had been through something real together and were choosing, carefully, to move forward. "Thank you for being here," she said. Thank you for the invitation, he said. Inside, Stephen Cole, named CEO 8 months earlier, after a national search that had, for the first time in Hartwell Dynamics history, included a majority of candidates from underrepresented backgrounds, opened the summit from the stage. Revenue up 38%, the first sustained growth the company had seen in 2 years. Employee satisfaction at 3.4 out of 5, up from 2.6. Still below where it needed to be, Stephen noted, but moving in a direction that had not been visible 12 months ago. 12 people on the executive leadership team, 7 of them women, 5 of them people of color, 1 of them a wheelchair user, not as a performance of diversity, but as the natural result of hiring the best available people from a larger pool than Hartwell Dynamics had ever previously considered. Denise Carter stood with the leadership team, gold-framed glasses, back straight. She had rebuilt the engineering department in 8 months, and the team's output had increased 60%. On the panel that followed, the Bloomberg moderator asked Damon what it felt like to sit on stage with the person who had thrown him out of this hotel 1 year ago. Damon was quiet for a moment before answering, and the quiet was not uncomfortable. It feels like evidence, he said, that something rare happened, that a person in a position of power did the actual work of change, not the performance of it. That doesn't erase what occurred. It doesn't make it not have happened, but it creates something new. He looked at Claire briefly and then back at the room. I didn't do this for Claire Hartwell. I did it for 3,500 employees who deserve better leadership than they had, and for every Black founder who needs proof that the door can open. The moderator turned to Claire. What would you say to the person you were 12 months ago? Claire did not look down. She had thought about this question for a long time, and she had decided to answer it honestly, which meant not answering it the way it had been asked. I wouldn't say it to myself, she said. I'd say it to Denise Carter. I'd say, you were always good enough. You were always smart enough. You always deserved to be heard. I was the one who wasn't ready, not you. In the third row, Denise Carter heard it. She did not cry. She did not smile. She looked at Claire with clear, steady eyes and gave one slow nod, and Claire received it for what it was. Not forgiveness, which was not hers to ask for, but acknowledgement, which was something she could use. After the summit, Damon and Claire stood near the east window, the same window where she had been standing when he walked in 1 year ago. Outside, Michigan Avenue moved in its usual way, unbothered and continuous. Do you know what changed me most this year? Damon asked. Walter, Claire said, before he could answer. He looked at her. The kitchen interview, she said. I watched it 10 times. Not because I needed to feel worse about what I did, but because he reminded me that the harm doesn't stop with the people who have the resources to demand accountability. It lands on everyone who gets put in that position. Everyone who has to choose between their dignity and their livelihood and doesn't have a Forbes profile to fall back on. Damon nodded slowly. That's why the fund is $300 million now, he said. Not for people like me, for people where my father was. People who are good enough and smart enough and who deserve exactly what I have, but who will never get the meeting because nobody spent 9 weeks quietly making the case for them. He looked out at the avenue. Real change isn't when powerful people learn to respect other powerful people. It's when Walter Grimes walks into any room in this country and is treated like a full human being before he says a single word without an audition. He was quiet for a moment. We're not there yet. He turned and looked at Claire directly. But we're moving. Across the lobby, Walter was back at his post. A woman in a red blazer stopped in front of him and asked for directions to conference room B, he told her. She thanked him and then said, almost as an afterthought, first time being invited here. Just close my seed round. Walter looked at her for a moment. Then he smiled. An uncomplicated, unguarded smile, the kind that has nothing in it except what it appears to be. Congratulations, he said. Welcome to the Grand Meridian. If this story made you feel something, drop a comment telling me which moment hit you hardest and where in the world you are watching from. Subscribe so you never miss the next one.